Good afternoon, and welcome to the webinar 10 Keys to Unlocking Revenue Potential, How Medical Device Companies Can Increase Revenue Through Relationships. Today's webinar is going to be presented by yours truly, Steve Selbst. I'm the CEO of Healthcents, Inc., and I'm joined as well by my partner and colleague, Susan Charkin, and Regina Vasquez, our VP of Accounts. Very pleased today to have the opportunity to share with you some very innovative ways for you to go about increasing your revenue relative to building new third-party relationships in addition to the channels that you currently invoke to increase your sales. A couple of administrative matters as we begin. The way that you can go about asking questions at any time is to simply send an email starting right now to info@healthcents.com, just as you see it on the screen here. And during our Q&A sessions, all you need to do on your phone to ask a live question is simply press *6, ask your question, and then when finished, press *6 again to silence your line. Also, if at any time during the session you lose your connection to command control here, simply go to join.me/healthcents in your browser, and you will be returned to the webinar instantly. In addition, at the end of the session, if you would like copies of any of the materials, as well as a complete copy of this recording, simply go to healthcents.com/copy, as indicated here, and you'll be able to receive the information, and it will come right back to your email. Before I continue and move into the content section, I see Ms. Regina Vasquez might have an administrative matter to cover. Regina?
For those of you who have not dialed into the conference line, I just wanted to share the dial-in number in case they weren't dialed in. And that number, if you need to dial into the conference line, is 213-226-1066, and the meeting ID number is 3716759999, and then hit the pound sign.
Yes, and just in case there are individuals that are looking at the screen that couldn't hear the message, I am going to type it on the screen one time quickly just to make sure those participants that may not have the information can get to it. And I'll leave it up here for just one moment. Okay, so I'll just leave it there for those that may be seeing the screen, but for whatever reason may not actually hear the session. Okay. Going once, going twice, and back to session. Okay, let me begin just to give you a quick overview of our company so you know a little bit about the company and the people that you're speaking with today. First off, our company, Healthcents, Inc., has been in business since 1994, and our core business has always been and continues to be centered on payer contracting. And we focus on payer contracting for all medical providers. And we are seeing, as the industry evolves, a tremendous uptick in mergers and consolidations and the emergence of companies like yours that manufacture medical devices that are used by medical practitioners and patients alike. And as a result, we also see that there's a huge opportunity for companies like yours to be able to leverage the expertise that we bring to the table to increase your revenues by enhancing your payer contracts agreements, and by seeking out new opportunities through other third-party relations, which we will talk about, such as formularies and PBMs and other means of go-to-market. So that will be the focus today. We do teach classes in this topic. We are considered industry experts. We teach these classes through the American Urological Association, the companies such as Alere Incorporated, which is a monitoring device manufacturer and distributor, and we teach through medical associations such as the AAOE, the ASCA, and to large university medical centers such as the Tulane University Medical Center. We do have an offering in this area called the Blueprint for Success that can be customized to the needs of your organization, and that can be found at healthcents.com. Additionally, we have a web service product called Revolution Software, which can be used to benchmark and analyze payer contracts and the codes that go along with those contracts that you're reimbursed on. We have many hundreds of active clients, and we have literally served at this point well over 10,000, even over 15,000 customers at this point have taken advantage of the skills and capabilities we bring to the table to leverage reimbursement. And many of our testimonials we highlight here at healthcents.com, HTML testimonials. You can certainly look at that. I would like to tell you a little bit more about the folks on the line today. I'm the CEO and co-owner of Healthcents, and I've had kind of a dual career. I've been with Healthcents since 2002 and share the ownership of the company with Ms. Susan Charkin. I tend to focus on our daily operations and contract management business and have personally negotiated well over 5,000 payer contracts. I also invented the product and algorithms for contracts analytics that go into the state-of-the-art Revolution software product, as well as had a 30-year career as a software development executive at IBM. And if you're doing the math, you're probably wondering, how old was I when I started at IBM? And the answer is I wasn't 11, even though that might lead you in that direction. I did have a little bit of overlap there. My colleague and partner, Ms. Susan Charkin, is a nationwide expert in payer contracting. She founded Healthcents in 1994 and has a very rich and deep background in contracting, both in payers as well as in providers. She has been a senior executive in payer contracting for companies such as various Blues organizations, HealthNet, Aetna, and she also was director of outpatient surgery at UCSF here in Northern California, as well as was a leading contributor as a trustee to a large community hospital in Monterey County, California. She's a well-known speaker and author as well. You can see some of the venues that she's been present at. And interestingly, Susan took the initiative on behalf of several medical groups to actually do early investigative work about ACOs and the impacts that ACOs would have on medical providers. She actually interviewed the founding fathers of the ACO model, including Dr. Elliot Fisher of the Brookings Institute, as well as Dr. McClelland and other founders, and some of the early IPAs, such as Monarch Healthcare, for example. Ms. Regina Vasquez, she is our infantry leader. She is the person that directs our day-to-day contracts management activity. Her count, I think, has crossed over 5,000 already since I've written this. And as far as negotiated contracts, she has also led the development of a major skilled nursing facility network build-out. She works with many device manufacturers, including one of our reference accounts, Alere Incorporated, and enabling companies such as Alere to increase their revenues through payer contracts, as well as through optimizing claims and new channels to market. She is consistently achieving results for our clients, which in turn generate 15% to 25% return on investment or more for many of our clients. So she makes our clients a lot of money, and that's what we're in the business of doing. So what can we do to help you? Well, we're going to start today by giving you the basis of information that I think will open the aperture for new revenue opportunities. And specifically, what we can do as a company for you is handle direct contract negotiations, including all phases of researching the appropriate payers, dissecting fee schedules, analyzing those fee schedules, and proposing the appropriate rates and carve-outs and the approach and negotiation techniques to maximize your reimbursement. Secondly, we can work with referral sources, and we're going to talk a lot about going beyond payer contracts today and talk about how you increase your referrals by not only doing payer contracts, but by focusing on getting on the appropriate formularies, depending on whether you're a device manufacturer distributor, get into group purchase organizations, and essentially combining these techniques to enable a new flow of revenue into your practice versus traditionally just selling directly to a provider. We also can focus on claims troubleshooting. We see a lot of issues today, particularly with the evolution of higher deductible and higher copayment and coinsurance plans with the actual payments that are occurring relative to contracted rates. And we are able to assist with ensuring accurate payment. That means getting you the maximum payments possible, and also credentialing and practice operations, as well as I mentioned, training through our Blueprint for Success class. Bottom line, this is about bringing together a set of capabilities that enable you to bring more revenue ultimately into your company. So that brings us to today's objectives. And the two objectives for today are very focused and straightforward. We're going to cover some techniques and strategies for maximizing revenue through a variety of sources of revenue, including payer contracts, including PBMs, formularies, distributor relationships, and GPOs. And we're going to learn how to successfully navigate the negotiation process as you engage deeply with payers into either contract renegotiations or into negotiating completely new payer contracts, depending on whether or not that is an appropriate strategy for your entity. I will, at certain points, probably about every 20 minutes into this session, starting about 5 to 10 minutes from now, pause for question and answer period so that we can kind of keep this in a dialogue mode, which is how I prefer to present, because I think it brings the most value to you as participants to have an opportunity to ask your questions as they occur. And if you're more comfortable, as I mentioned before, letting us know your question through an electronic mechanism, please just send an email to info@healthcents.com rather than using a chat room here where those chats just come in and out. We don't necessarily see them. Anyhow, sources of revenue. So payer contracts can be one source of revenue if ultimately you're selling your product to patients and you don't want those patients to pay out of pocket. Then payers become very critical because they're going to ultimately, through the benefit plans, cover most of the cost associated with the devices that in turn you're selling to patients. There's pharmacy benefit managers, and if it's appropriate to sell your products through a pharmacy benefit program, then a PBM is a terrific mechanism. There are formularies, which in turn is going to enable revenue to flow if you're on the formulary of a large PBM. And then there's group purchase organizations that are essentially in place to enable discounted purchases on products. And then there's distributors. And what we're going to do is spend a few minutes discussing in more detail the definitions behind each of these sources of revenue, and then bring them together in terms of how you can go to market and take advantage of these distribution and go-to-market mechanisms to generate more revenue. I will actually take this opportunity before we delve into the next segment to open up the lines, both to give the audience, first and foremost, an opportunity to participate early on and answer any questions. And I'll also do it for the purpose of enabling my colleagues to share any upfront information that they might have as we get into the details of the session. So, first thing is I will open up the lines and explain how you ask your question. And now what you may do, if you would like to ask a live question, is simply press *6 on your phone and ask your question. So I will pause, see if we have any live questions. And I will ask Regina and Susan if we have any questions that may have come in so far at info@healthcents.com. Regina and Susan?
Nope, I think that we are ready to begin.
Okay, then we shall continue. And for now, I will leave the lines set up so that when we pause for the next session, as long as I don't hear background noise, I will simply ask that you press *6 at the next pause if you'd like to ask a question. Okay, so for each of these types, let's talk about what they are. And for some of you that have had payer contracts, this may be a little bit redundant, but that's okay. Remember that not every medical device manufacturer distributor has payer contracts, so I think it's important when we throw around a term, regardless of what that term is, especially if it's source of revenue and an entity type, that we make sure to define it correctly. So what is a payer? A payer is basically a company that sells health insurance plans, plain and simple. It's all the familiar ones. It's California has a Blue Cross and Blue Shield. It's BCBS in most other states. It's Aetna, it's Cigna, it's UHC. It's a variety of smaller payers, other large payers. These are companies that basically underwrite health insurance plans. Now, there's also the self-insured employer group. And the self-insured employer group, for instance, a company like IBM, who I work for, that essentially insures its own employees and either administers the plan itself or, more than likely, will use one of the large payer organizations on their behalf to administer the insurance plans and to provide the insurance products that are then purchased by the employees of their organization, of their company. So when we talk about payers, basically think of them as health insurance companies, either the carriers themselves or self-insured employer groups, often who present themselves through the carrier who is administering the plan on their behalf. Then there is the pharmacy benefit manager. And the pharmacy benefit manager are basically large companies that manage the pharmacy benefit program for an employer or health plan. And you'll see that when you're selling to patients who have insurance through various companies that are in turn reimbursed, that a portion of the benefit plan is typically tied back to a PBM, more usually for prescription drugs and the like, but there also are many products nowadays that are carried by these PBMs that are in the scope of medical devices that are actually carried on the shelf of the pharmacy or even sold through mail order. So we're talking about companies here like CVS Caremark, Medco, Express Scripts, to name a few. And basically the pharmacy benefit manager is in place to pay and process pharmacy claims and then in turn to manage and maintain formularies. And speaking of formularies, what exactly is a formulary? Well, the PBM, the pharmacy benefit manager, it needs to have a list of specific drugs and products that can be sold and reimbursed by payers. And that list of products is called a formulary. And then in turn, the formulary can be one of 3 different types, as well as can be found in 3 different tiers. So first, let's talk about the types. Well, there's open formularies, there's managed formularies, and there's closed formularies. Now, the open would be the most broad or least restrictive, and it would list all or most of the drugs or products that are on this formulary list, and they'll also provide rankings based on the preferred status. On the other end of the extreme would be the most restrictive form of formulary, and that would be the closed formulary. And this would be a more limited list of drugs that are covered by the health plan, and in some cases, patients can actually access to non-formulary drugs and products, but in turn would have to make much higher co-payments. Now, it'd be great if you could jump into a closed formulary and be on a small list of approved drugs, but at the same time, it's important to consider the open formulary so that you can get a foot in the door and have an opportunity to get reimbursed. And then in the middle here is the managed formulary, which is similar to open formularies, but introduces incentives which encourage, in turn, the use of these preferred products that are on the list. There are going to be, as you move from the open formulary into the managed formulary, there can be higher co-payments for non-preferred products. There can be higher dispensing fees as compared to open formularies, and there can be drug withhold and prior authorization requirements, so a little bit more processing required as you move from the left to the right. But the main point about formularies, regardless of which type, is to be aware of the fact that there are less restrictive open formularies and more restrictive closed formularies from left to right, and that the formulary is a very critical list to be on relative to invoking reimbursement for your products if you sell those products into a pharmacy, and that's the key. And so the tiers. So formularies are also tiered. We have generics, which are in the lowest tier, and then we have brand names, the highest tier. The co-payments are going to go up as you go up the tiers, and you also move from generic onto brand names as you move up the tiers as well. And then we have group purchasing organizations, and the GPOs have just exploded, certainly in the last 5 to 10 years. And they are a very powerful mechanism for selling medical device products. There are examples of them. These are just a few of the more known brand names that sell a broad array of products. But these are organizations that most likely you would want to be a part of, because what they do is they're kind of like a Costco of sorts, in that the way the Costco aggregates products and sells them at a discount to consumers. I mean, the difference there is that obviously Costco carries products on their shelves. There are no shelves on the GPO, but if you belong to a GPO as a member, you get access to this broad array of medical device products across all specialties, and you end up either paying a membership fee, or the vendor organization covers the fees, and in any case, the GPO is going to provide a discount to the membership for all products that are purchased. So it's a way of aggregating a large number of products and enabling the medical practices and providers to be able to source those products from an organization at a discount and get what they need regardless of their specialty. So it's very critical strategically to have a very well thought out and deliberate GPO map that you then connect into, so that your products will actually be sold as part of the discount program that is offered by the GPO. And again, don't confuse this with a company that stocks products. These are contracts that enable the purchasing directly from vendors at a discount. But they are very critical, and in a way they are also like a formulary, a way of adding credibility, good housekeeping seal of approval to your products if they're on the list of a major GPO that in turn is able to present those products to its providers at a discount. And then there are distributors, and we've seen the evolution of large companies like Quill Healthcare, which is a division of Staples, for example, who have broadened their portfolio of products to not only sell office supply products, but to sell a complete line of medical supply products. And as a result, it's important to build distribution agreements with the appropriate organizations. And again, whether or not you should be selling your products through Quill Healthcare, McKesson, Henry Schein, or any number of third-party distributors is a function of the kind of product, the price points, who you're going to market with. But clearly, distribution agreements are a very critical channel to ultimately deliver your products and derive sales to your target markets, whether your target market is patients or you're selling into providers. Okay, before I go to the next chart, I think, now that we've conveyed a little bit of the definitions about the various channels and then start to bring it together, I think now's a great time to, again, take a pause and answer any direct questions the audience may have, as well as any that may have come in at info@Healthcents. So first, let me see if there are any live questions that someone would like to ask directly. So if so, please press *6 on your phone at this time and go ahead and fire away. Okay. Then let me ask Susan and Regina, do we have questions that may have come in through info@Healthcents?
Yeah, this is Susan. I've got four. And a couple of them are on this kind of same topic, so I'll kind of summarize it. What I'm hearing from people on the phone is that this is really confusing, and I'll kind of combine the questions I'm getting into one. How do I know which one of these entities I need to contract with? How do I get the list of people who I need to contract with? Do I need to contract with all of them? This is all fine, but kind of like, what are the steps I need to take to get this going, and then kind of what's the value?
That's okay. Well, that's certainly a terrific question, and it's ultimately the most important question to answer, because it's going to determine what amounts to the go-to-market roadmap for either a device manufacturer company or a company that's in the business of distributing medical device products. So, unfortunately, the answer isn't a simple, black and white road answer. And what I would say about it is, and this chart begins to depict it a little bit, happens to be up on the screen, is that first, we have to consider whether or not your product is, whether or not you are a manufacturer and you're trying to develop channels for your product, or whether you're a distributor and you're trying to develop channels for your product. And there are nuances and differences based on whether you're a manufacturer or a distributor. For example, a manufacturer is going to want to be on formularies, and that wouldn't necessarily be applicable to a distributor. Well, why is that? Well, it's because a formulary is going to list the products from the manufacturer that the PBM is authorized to sell. So if a distributor doesn't manufacture a product, it's not necessarily relevant to the distributor. On the other hand, the distributor could use a PBM as a go-to-market opportunity to sell its products. So what I'm trying to develop here, unfold, is that to put together a specific sales plan and map the precise use of these channels really would require a one-on-one sit-down discussion to truly understand the nature of the products that you sell, who you're selling them to. That is, if you look at this particular example, traditional case is products often get sold directly to providers and maybe in some cases to patients, but probably more traditionally to providers, because most patients, unless it's a low price point, aren't going to have the money to foot the bill for a complex piece of, monitoring equipment, for example. So what needs to be done here is to build a map based on the nature of the products that you sell, who you're ultimately trying to get these products to through the distribution network, figure out the price points of your products, and figure out the best combination of channels. And it's not as simple as saying, even if we're going to contract, let's say we determine that in order to get to patients, you need payer contracts. Well, then if you're a national company, the question is going to be, well, do I need Blue Cross Blue Shield in Arizona? Do I need United Healthcare, in some kind of national agreement? I mean, you get to within each of these scenarios, you need to get to a very specific strategy that fits the business model that you have. For example, if your primary target market is in one portion of the U.S., then it may be important to concentrate on, for instance, let's say you sell to the Midwest, it may be important to concentrate on putting together a collection of payer agreements for the large name payers in the Midwest region. And that may also determine that you actually need to open up a location in order to get reimbursed, which will be the next layer of discussion. We've had, for instance, durable medical equipment companies, one of our reference accounts, nationwide, has also, built this kind of a distribution network, and it becomes very critical that you understand that to get payer contracts, to get on formularies, to build the right distribution network, it requires customization, and the goal today isn't to realistically, it's not to send you away with a specific map for your organization, but it's rather to open the aperture so that you understand the breadth of new revenue-making opportunities that may be out there for you. And then if you'd like, to drill into what's the best strategy, we more than welcome the opportunity to get together with you one-on-one. And in fact, we're going to offer at the end here, the punchline is we're going to offer you a free half-hour consult to better understand your organization and what some of those opportunities may be. But this is a brave new world. It's there isn't a one-size-fits-all. It truly depends on a variety of factors. What kind of products are you selling? What kind of organization are you? What geographies do you sell in? Are you selling to providers and patients? Are you just selling to providers? Are you just selling to patients? Are you going to sell through pharmacies or not? Are there appropriate distributors or retailers, depending on the price points? So this is a multidimensional equation that needs some real forethought, because once you put your sales channel in place, that's going to become at least as critical as the direct sales force, if not more so, over time, and may even determine the strategy that you deploy relative to compensation mechanisms with your direct sales force. So that's kind of a long answer to what was a seemingly short question, but I understand and appreciate the complexities, because it is a complex scenario. B, in summary, I would say that it's very critical to have a unique and customized plan built, and we're more than happy to do that with you individually. Susan, what was the question?
And I have another question. I know that you don't want to, got a lot to cover here, but I have one from a venture capital firm. And they want to know that for medical device and equipment companies, should they be looking at doing these strategies in their startup, the growth, or second round? In other words, what part of their cycle should they be looking to do this? Do you just wanted to see if you had any
well, I think that's a great, another great question. I really, just want to say to the audience, I appreciate you asking these questions, because I think everybody here is benefiting as you bring them up. I would answer that and say, very critical, thinking about entrepreneurial business plans, and we have had some experience with that in the past as well, that this is a very important piece of the essentially going into the startup mode and seeking venture capital, whether it's through a venture capital firm or through angel investors or the like. This becomes a part of the justification of the sales plan and map and go-to-market and channel strategy that should really feed into the business plan. So I would very much encourage that this be done up front if possible. Now, of course, if you're past that startup stage and you're already selling products and you already have a sales force in place and you're selling to providers, for example, well, it's not too late. That now, if let's say you're building your business at some increment of revenue growth through that channel, well, this is a great opportunity now to enhance your sales plan by now adding on, if you will, the appropriate payers and PBM formularies and distributors, so that you can further enhance the acceleration of your revenue curve. So the ideal thing is to do it at startup, but by no means is it too late if you get further into the cycle.
Okay. Yeah, we've got some more questions, but I'm going to let you go ahead and we'll kind of table these as we move on. Okay,
and I know we've had kind of an interesting discussion here. Let me just ask the audience, again, if you'd like to ask a live question, I'd invite you to do that again here. Just press *6, or we'll move on and give you another opportunity a little bit later. Okay. Sometimes we get shy audiences in webinars. That's why we opened up info at Healthcents, because it might be more expeditious at times for participation. Okay. Now, you often hear the term buy and bill. And what I mean by buy and bill is this would be the more traditional case of you have a monitoring equipment or a catheter or something like that, and you're selling it directly to a provider. Let's say, by way of example, a medical practice in this case. It could be a hospital system, but the idea is that the provider is buying your product and in turn billing for the services that they provide. So the mechanism of reimbursement of that provider becomes very critical to their ability to consume your product, because your product is costing them out-of-pocket money at whatever price point you're selling it at or whatever discount. But in order for them to recoup and make a profit, what they need to do is make that profit through the services that they provide. So this is where you can provide a service ultimately to, if you have the appropriate education, know how to do this. Your sales team can, as part of its sales process, educate your providers about which CPT codes, for example, to use, how to map the appropriate ICD-9 and 10 diagnostic codes into the claims filing process, so that what's going to happen is that the services that are tied, the codes and services that are tied to the delivery of the provider are going to be the mechanism that the provider uses to achieve their reimbursement. And so this whole mapping of what happens after a provider consumes your product and in turn is using it to provide services to patients is very critical. And it can be HCPCS codes, CPT codes. It really depends on which kind of product you're selling, and determining the appropriate code is very critical. We have had providers ultimately try to bill for certain generic codes like an A9999, and that can be sometimes problematic, where a payer might not recognize a generic code for billing a certain kind of a service that might be associated with your equipment. So the idea is to study the payers some as well that the providers are already contracted with to provide them the guidance that they need to pick the appropriate HCPCS or CPT codes to bill for their services. So that's a whole other dimension. And I mentioned here the generic A9999 scenario. The other considerations when you start to drill into direct payer contracts, and again, the one factor is that direct payer contracts are going to be most applicable for you if patients are consuming your products, is to do that mapping of your strategy state by state. And literally, there are a few cases where you might be able to do a national agreement, but by and large, payers are going to put separate reimbursement schedules and contracts in place by state. So doing the geographic mapping and picking, typically what we have done with companies like yours is we look at the construct of your sales force and at a practical level and look at how many sales reps, are present in the Southeast, how many are in the Northwest, and so on. And then we start to pick the more populous states that those reps do most of their farming in. And then in turn, we build a contracting strategy that maps directly to the sales strategy. And that's really what you want to do from a geographic perspective. We've talked about, HCPCS codes or CPT codes and how to figure out what's appropriate there. And that's going to be key because you're going to sell a lot less product if ultimately physicians, buy them and, can't get reimbursed. They're going to find other ways of providing the service and want to consume less of your product. So you want to make that an easy process when it's a buy and bill. And you also want to make sure that you provide the appropriate education and services that are associated with your products. So sometimes a product might require some degree of training and education, and there are codes that are available depending on what you're selling that actually allow for the billing of the service that's associated with the product and not just the product itself. You're going to want to use traditional benchmarks relative to Medicare to assess the level of reimbursement. And as you start to put a portfolio of payer agreements in place, there are mechanisms and ways in which you can compare and cross-compare and benchmark your reimbursement, and tooling like our Revolution software, which you can see a demo of on our website, can help you with that kind of benchmarking. So when we talk about payer contracting, there's several different stages. And we break it 10 practices into 3 specific areas: preparing, negotiating, and monitoring. And generally, preparing means the upfront analysis that goes into figuring out, for instance, like we discussed, the geographies that you would like to contract in, goes into figuring out which particular codes to bill, goes into figuring out whether or not you're going to offer education associated with those codes and how to bill it, and putting together that entire map so that you don't just, plow into getting payer contracts, because what's the point of putting all that effort and manpower in if at the end of the day you're not going to derive revenue benefits? So you want to, really spend that analysis time up front, and as you'll see in a moment, that's going to be about a 50 to 60% of the effort. The next piece is going to be the negotiation, and only engage in negotiation and the techniques that we're going to discuss after you have a very well thought out map of who you want to contract with, why you want to contract with them, where the revenue and referral expectations might come from, and understanding how it maps to your sales force. Only then would you want to engage in the negotiations, so that successful negotiations are going to result in revenue. And, we show the tug of war that sometimes happens with payers, but actually, if you bring a value proposition that plays into value-based contracting today, such as your equipment can assist with chronic care and reduced hospital readmissions. You're going to have a terrific opportunity, I think, to create a compelling value proposition for the payer. And when you negotiate, you should always be thinking about not only what's good for you, but why it's good for the payer, because there are many value propositions today associated with medical devices that truly do improve care and improve patient outcomes. And those kinds of products are welcomed by payers because guess what? It reduces their cost of operation and enables them more revenue benefit and profitability on their premiums, and that's what they're all about. So there is a win-win to be had, and actually a win-win-win, a three-legged stool, where you can win by having a payer contract and make more money. The payer can win by having your equipment in its portfolio of products and services to sell, and they can save money by doing so and gain efficiency. And the patient can get better treatment. I mean, that is the perfect scenario. Now, last but not least is going to be monitoring. And when I talk about monitoring, no pun intended, this isn't the context of heart monitoring per se, but rather payer contract monitoring, claims monitoring, because what happens once you put contracted rates in place is the claims are going to get paid, and hopefully they're going to get paid correctly, and that doesn't always happen. So to make sure that you are paid correctly at all times, you should have a business process in place to do monthly claims audits and do a random sampling, and we have techniques for doing that as well. But what you're trying to do, is you don't have to boil the ocean here. There's some very expensive products on the market that for $10,000 or $20,000 a month can essentially replicate the precision of a large banking system's accuracy on transaction processing. That's not what you're really looking for here per se. I mean, if you can afford it, that's great, but most providers cannot afford that. What they instead are looking to do is to make sure that they see the forest through the trees, and that the preponderance of claims that are being processed, and usually device manufacturers have a small number of codes in which they're reimbursed. So all you need to do is make sure that you do appropriate monitoring each month, and if you detect underpayments, you want to challenge them early, because you'll typically find in payer contracts almost universally that there is a retrospective review period upon which, if you exceed that period, there is no opportunity, even if you were underpaid, go back and get paid correctly. The monitoring is unfortunately the most forgotten part of the process, and it's so important because what good did it do to negotiate it? You did great analysis, you negotiated a terrific agreement, and now it's in place, and you're not getting paid correctly, and you don't even know it. So you haven't derived the benefit of this contract that you put in place. So we further distill out this process into its various stages. As part of the prepare stage, we're going to do the analysis, which we've talked about. We're then going to move into doing a proposal letter preparation. And whenever you invoke a negotiation with a payer, the best way to do it, in my experience and in the experience of all of the folks that have worked at Healthcents Inc., is to have a very thoughtful proposal letter. And I'll give you a few tips about how to prepare those letters in a moment. And then you want to make initial contact after sending that proposal letter to make sure that it's found its way to the right person in the organization. And one of the common mistakes that all providers make, including device manufacturers and distributors that put payer agreements in place, is they don't get the proposal to the right person in the organization, or even to the right part of the organization. Provider relations, when you're not that familiar with an organization, seems like a good place to send most requests, but it's really not when it comes to payer contracts. Really, every large payer that you deal with is going to have a contracting department, and it will be different than the purpose of provider relations, which is usually to assist members with, figuring out their claims and claims payment issues. This is a whole different kind of an organization than a contracting department in a large payer. It's a contracting manager that you want to get your proposal to. So part of that upfront research is making sure that you deliver that proposal letter to the appropriate contracts manager in the contracting organization. And then once you've done that, you can move into negotiations. And we'll talk about, obstacles in negotiations and what to do and so forth. But at some point, if you do not get the result that you intend to achieve at the lowest level of the payer organization, then you move up and escalate. And, this is very deliberate. I have had many providers say, why don't we just, why are we wasting time? Why don't we just go to the senior executive responsible for this payer in this state? Well, the answer is, if you do that, then you take away your negotiating power from the get-go, because it becomes a one-shot pony at that point. Because if, let's say, the VP of contracting decides to send you back to the first-level negotiator, now you're stuck. If you don't like the outcome at the first-level negotiator, you can't take it back up. You've already been there, done that. Whereas if you have done diligence at the first level and you get the intelligence to figure out whether or not it's going to be possible to conclude the negotiation, and if you don't, then sure, escalate and bring in the next level of management, but work your way very deliberately up the chain, and don't skip the steps, because all you're doing is you're basically, for every link in that chain that you cut off in escalation, then you're basically removing an opportunity in negotiations for you to be able to counteract an undesirable result at the lower levels. So we have found, and we've tried it both ways over the years, and certainly we have learned that it makes sense every time to commence a negotiation at the lowest level and then work its way up. And by the way, there's a good chance, there's certainly probably a 30 to 50% or greater chance that you can get to, depending on the scenario, and especially if you have a strong value proposition, you may do just fine if you get to the right contracts manager and work it at that level. It's not an automatic rejection, especially with a desirable, medical device that you're manufacturing or distributing. Again, there's something in it for the payer. So you can often get a hearing from a medical director, and there's, sometimes you can make a hero out of that contracts negotiator if they've learned about something new that you're offering that they didn't even realize was on the market. They can look good and bring their medical director in and their senior management, and they can show all the great things that they've done to help their company save money by bringing your product into their network. So, you can make an ally out of that contracts negotiator potentially. Anyway, you then negotiate your agreement, and then we talked about the fact that once it's in place, you must monitor those claims, make sure they're paid correctly. And the other thing you want to do is get your calendar together based on the renewal period of the contract. And what I mean by that is these payer contracts typically have 1 year or multi-year terms. And usually the term and termination, while ideally you'd want it to be 90 days without cause, usually the agreements nowadays are set up where you can terminate up to a certain number of days prior to the anniversary date of the agreement. Otherwise, it automatically renews. That would be the so-called evergreen kind of a contract, which is going to persist until either you or the payer decides to make a change within those parameters. Or you might have a multi-year agreement, which may actually be desirable if you can build revenue accelerators into that agreement, where you don't just get a boost that first year, but rather you have the opportunity through value-based incentives as well as through cost of living adjustments to be able to increase revenue over the term of the agreement. Let's say it's a 3-year term. Maybe you get X% year 1, and then a boost, year 2 and year 3 that's automatic for the duration of the agreement. So if you are going to lock long-term, make sure, again, that there's something reasonable in it for you. And it's sort of like, again, it's like investing into equities in that regard. If you take the safer route and get a 3-year scenario, you can lock your returns. On the other hand, there's some risk in the sense that If there's a great acceleration of inflation, for example, during that period, then maybe you might have been better off at the end of the first year, going back to the table and renegotiating. So, that gets down to a preference and a risk acceptance. We find that this current environment, as it comes to relative to reimbursement, tends to be volatile more on the downside, where there's pressure to bring reimbursements down both through the Medicare system as well as in commercial payers, especially in fee-for-service. That it's probably better, in general, in our opinion, you can get a good lock for a few years and good predictable revenue stream with reasonable revenue accelerators to consider that kind of approach in what is definitely a very highly volatile environment. So you can look at these steps in terms of breaking, prepare, negotiate, and monitor down further. You're going to do this evaluation that we talked about, and I've customized this a little bit for you as device manufacturers, as we talked about before, where some of your considerations are different than a medical practice as far as geography, sales force mapping, code mapping, those sorts of things. SWOT analysis, that's where you're going to really talk about getting that value proposition, which is ever so important, together. And I'd like you to have that before you get in front of a payer, because one of the things that will often come up when you present a new medical device paradigm into a payer is they may not be familiar with it, and you want to be able to get it in front of both a business executive in contracts management and a medical director and quickly establish the value. I can recall that we had a client that dealt, for example, with vitamin supplements for dialysis patients, and they were a specialty pharmacy. Often, for whatever reason, the payers also categorize them as DME, and we had many discussions about how when the albumin levels reached certain thresholds, that they could actually prevent further chronic and acute dialysis events from occurring by the use of their vitamin supplements, that sort of thing. And that, really was very helpful to a number of the medical directors who then, gave serious consideration and actually moved to putting agreements in place because they could see that their cost of care was very high when it came to treating acute and chronic dialysis patients, and if they could avoid that and reduce it by some level, that could be a tremendous return on investment. That's where I talk about the win-win-win. The patient avoids a chronic condition or an acute condition. You make money, and the payer saves money, and that's what we like to see. That's what a good SWOT analysis would lead to. And then we've talked about the importance of the proposal letter. Again, time dedicated. You want to spend more than half your time getting that preparation straight. It's like any good business proposition. The better prepared you are, the better the outcome is going to be. The negotiation is going to flow a lot more easily if you have that value proposition calibrated. You know who and why you're wanting to go to market and through certain channels and with certain payers. It's going to be a lot better. And then doing that monitoring on the back end, while it doesn't take a lot of time, it can save you a lot of money because that's where you're going to detect underpayment issues, and they're not going to take a lot of time to troubleshoot. If you find them early, they're going to get very expensive and perhaps cause you to even have to dip into your legal budget and everything else if you find a big discrepancy after a retrospective review period. So that's very critical. I think this is another good pause point. So again, if you would like to ask a question at this time, please press *6 on your phone and go ahead and ask your question.
All right, this is Susan, and is it okay if somebody asks a question through the info?
Yeah, absolutely. Seems like that's the preferred mechanism here, so let's field all the info questions.
Yep, one of the questions, and it actually came up yesterday, was, this person wants to know, and it's actually it's a really good question, is, what do you do when you can't get somebody to come to the table and you've tried, and what strategies can they use when somebody, and you just keep hearing no?
Oh, okay. Great question. So what do we do if the payer just says no? Well, the first thing is, if we've followed the prescribed process, which is very important to do. Any good business process should be replicable, and by repeating it in a consistent and prescribed manner, it should achieve the appropriate results. So what I mean by that is, if you started at the lowest level of the payer organization and you were told no by that first level contract negotiator, then the first thing you want to do is appeal your business proposition, your value proposition, to the senior management in the contract management and medical director organization at the payer. They'll have the opportunity to do that if you do not skip links in the chain and get too high too fast, because you'll have taken away that opportunity if you get pushed back to the first level negotiator, and then that occurs. So what you do if you hear no is, you're already prepared, right, with your value proposition. Right, we said 60% here is all about preparation, and that's part of it, is getting the value proposition together. And now it's time to put that value proposition to use by asking for a review with the medical director and contracts management executive team, so that you can make the appeal. You certainly want to understand, and face up to the realities of your product. If you're dealing with a commoditized product, let's say a kind of a urological catheter that is commonplace, and there's 20 other options just like yours, it may be a harder slug than if you have a unique monitoring device that is going to reduce the chances of a heart failure because of the early monitoring and detection through that device during an outpatient period. So, you do need to kind of assess where your strong points are, and as much as possible, that value proposition needs to differentiate relative to possible companies that may already be in the payer's network. I mean, there's nothing more frustrating than appealing a case, thinking that your product is unique, and then finding out, from the payer that there's already 3 products like yours that exist. So you really want to have a good grasp of the competitive landscape and why it's ultimately going to provide for efficiency to have your device reimbursed through a payer organization. And there must be a reason for it, because by the virtue of the existence of having by manufacturing a medical device or distributing one, you're obviously doing it for a purpose, and presumably that purpose is that it has some dimension of improved patient care, and that then follows the logic that if it's improving patient care, there should be something in it for the payer as well, because it should be therefore reducing payer cost while it's improving patient care. The two go hand in glove.
Okay. And one other question, actually a couple of, but I know in the interest of time. I am a small DME company. I have a lot of competition. I would like to get an increase out of, they mentioned the payer, I can't say who it is, but why would a insurance company give me an increase if I have lots of competition and I'm not one of the big guys?
Oh, okay. Well, in the spirit of passing the ball around a little and giving everybody a chance to participate, and since she has a few DME companies that are in the small to medium-sized range that she's servicing right now, I will give Regina the first crack at this one.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. I think, again, you have to go back to your value proposition. If you have a lot of competition, probably one of the reasons you're still in business is that you do something unique, and you either have a large referral base, or you have a connection to a large employer group in the area, or there's something that you're doing that's keeping you afloat and that's keeping you in the market. So you want to capitalize on that and and push that point with the payer to either maybe get a better rate on particular items, maybe not across the board on the entire fee schedule, but focus on those things that you do that other people don't provide. That would be one area to help push that conversation forward. Another is to look to, again, those relationships. Are your relationships with do you provide services to other hospitals? Are there other things that make you stand out from your competition? And those are the things that you want to focus on in your discussion with the payer.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more with Gina's assessment, which, by the way, comes firsthand from dealing with building value propositions repetitively for DME companies, probably like yours, where it was necessary to differentiate, even though there was competition. And one of the things that I was thinking of when hearing the question is that if you can go about, if you gather data, data can be the king or queen of your success here. And the reason being that if you can demonstrate with data that you've gathered that your product and perhaps service combined produce a better patient outcome than your competitors, and you can show that information, that as well will tend to enhance your success of obtaining a network agreement, or perhaps even turn the payer's attention to the fact that they ought to make a network exception and give it a shot. Because even on a commoditized device, if a payer can derive additional value based on compliance metrics or any other metrics that you may have, you will enhance chances for success. I think where it becomes much more difficult is if you have a, for lack of a better way of describing it, sort of a touchy-feely, subjective way of describing your value proposition, but it's not backed up by any statistics of improvement in patient care, better chronic care management, better disease management, whatever metrics you can possibly put your finger on are going to provide for an enhanced case. And I think we have found over and over again that the companies that can provide specific, accurate quotes about improvement and back it up with numbers do far better than their competition. So I would say that is a way, if you're in a more commoditized environment, if you're not doing it already, start tracking the data outcomes that are associated with the use of your product in the marketplace.
And I was just thinking on another area too is if your business processes improve efficiency. So, for example, if you have a way to reduce waste in the process, maybe you don't. I'm just thinking of some of our clients who, rather than just every 3 months drop shipping replacement supplies, they actually check in with the patient and see if they need those supplies, right? Or if they might have a surplus. So there might be some value in bringing up those types of waste reduction initiatives if you have them. Also, Steve made me think of something else where if you can reduce, if use of your product can be documented to reduce like readmissions to hospitals, because that's a huge deal right now, because hospitals are starting to get dinged by public payers for readmissions within a certain period of time after discharge. meaning that the hospital won't get paid for that readmission if it's related back to the hospital. So if you can document that your business processes, your follow-up program, your device itself can help reduce hospital admissions, and that if you get connected in with the hospital system, that will then help, you have some data, that might be helpful too. That's a good selling point to a payer.
Absolutely. And, an emerging trend too that could be leveraged as well is the emergence of telemedicine. And what I mean by that is if your device is, let's say, involved in chronic care cases, there are actually now codes, nine codes that can be billed as telemedicine codes, and the payers are actually embracing that scenario. So it may be that if you do have a service associated with your products, and that service facilitates and improves chronic care management, that you can actually leverage the emerging trend of telemedicine to your advantage as well. Okay. Susan, were there any other questions at this point?
Actually, there were, but in deference to time, I think we need to move on, and then I can ask the last questions as we wrap up.
Okay, very good. Then we shall continue on. So SWOT. This is, again, a little bit of a map of what you should think about when it comes to building your value proposition. And all edges of this are important, because understanding your strengths and opportunities is a part of it, but it's also important, as we've just pointed out, to understand where the threats are coming from and how you're going to address them. In fact, arguably, that may even be more important than knowing what you're good at, because most of us can cite the three things that we do great, but then it becomes more difficult sometimes to address the issue of somebody else might be doing some of those same things great too. And so how do we differentiate? And for example, one of the items that came to mind is we've worked with specialty labs, another kind of customer, and those specialty labs sometimes would have certain procedures where they would take samples, for example, and reduce the number of steps that a like process would otherwise use. But the issue is then that needs to be coupled with a benefit, because if it's the same price as a slightly longer process, then from a payer perspective, it's like, it can be done faster, and it may make it a slightly more efficient testing process to do a lab test, but it doesn't save me money. Why do I care? You see, so if you can couple up the fact that your device in some way does something more efficiently than a competitor's device, and you can couple that up with a pricing advantage, that may help too. And even though it might reduce margin initially, often to get a foot in the door and build out the volume and referrals that will often come from a payer network, it may well be worth considering that kind of an approach. So I just ask you to really think about the threats, the competitors, pricing advantages coupled with other advantages that your product/service may have. And again, pricing is not always a weapon if you're into certain kinds of spaces, but it can be if you're squarely in a commoditized scenario and you have other benefits that you can couple with it. So now let's discuss briefly proposal letters. And one of the things about proposal letters is you don't want them to resemble the novel Moby Dick. In other words, you don't want to write the Don't Eat the Daisies version of a novel that goes on, for hundreds of pages, or even tens of pages, or even 5 pages. It's too long. Let's just get this thing down to, let's set a goal here that your proposal letter is not going to be any more than, let's say, a page and a half to 2 pages. And, you know, if it's 2 pages, that's on the outer edge of how long it needs to be. So you don't want this to be too long. And the reason is that payers get a lot of proposals, and yours is going to find itself in a pile of paper lost on the desk if there's too much to it. So get to the point fast, and let's talk about, you know, why you're writing this letter, what you're asking for, what your advantages are, and then put them on the hook. Meaning, tell them you want to hear by a certain date, and then follow up and make sure that it happens. But keep it very net. And at some level, this might seem apparent, but I can tell you that we have seen this problem or this tendency to overbuild out a proposal letter become a real deficit when it comes to negotiations, because I think there's a tendency when you're passionate about your products, which is great, to tell everybody all the great things your product does and to tell them as much as possible. And in this case, you need to cut that down. You need to get to the point faster. So relative to best practices, once you get past the proposal letter, then what you want to do is quickly follow up. It means within about 3 to 5 days from sending that proposal letter out, and you want to get to the payer contracts manager that you sent it to, make sure they've received the letter. I can tell you there's probably about 20% of the cases where it's, oh, you sent me a letter? Really? Resend it. Well, you don't want to wait 3 to 5 weeks only to find out that the letter was never received. So get out there. It takes a lot of effort to stay on top of these negotiations, but it's well worth it. Get out there the first week, make sure that letter's in the right hands, and make sure to remind the payer that there's a certain date on it, and that that's within a time frame that's going to work, etc. We talked about what happens if they say no. And as long as you start, if you follow the prescribed process and you start at the first level of the payer organization, you're going to have an opportunity to escalate and make your value proposition. Please don't take away your negotiating power by taking it too high too soon. And then you're going to optimize your offers. Always the goal is to get some offer. I always tell providers, get an offer. Even if it's the wrong offer, some offer is better than no response, because no response means there's no ball game. There's no negotiation. A poor response means you can respond to it. You can escalate it. You have options. So let's evoke some kind of a response from the payer. And then let's review the contract language for items that are affecting reimbursement. And relative to some of those items, what I would suggest is that you consider items such as the term of the agreement, the term and termination without cause of 90 days, making sure your claims get filed and paid in a reasonable period of time. You're going to look for some of those operational constructs. There's a whole lesson to be had about getting reimbursed, getting your charge master set up high enough where your bill charges are always in excess of your contracted payments, and ideally set probably at somewhere in the range at UCR levels at about 250% or more of Medicare, so that you don't get hit by the fact that you get reimbursed at your bill charge because it's less than your contracted rate, because many, if not all, payer contracts you're going to come across are going to have a clause in it that says you can pay the lesser your bill charge or your contracted rate. So there'll be a whole host of those kinds of items to look for. And then we talked about monitoring and doing a sampling of EOBs to make sure that you're paid correctly. We have a module in our Revolution software product that can essentially do this for you by you feeding it some data. It will identify both underpayment conditions where you're not being paid at your contracted rate, being paid less, and then it will also identify for you cases where you have not set your bill charge at a UCR threshold and are therefore leaving money on the table for your out-of-network patients. We talked about making those appeals in a timely fashion, because if you don't do them in a timely fashion and you have a retrospective review that had to happen within 90 days and it's now day 91, since you saw the patient, well, you're kind of out of luck at that point because you passed the period of time where you can challenge the claim. So let's not let that happen. And then let's invoke the renegotiation at the appropriate time. Okay. So we put a sample in here which you can look at in more detail later, but the idea is to lay out a matrix like this one that has your codes, and ultimately it compares the rates that you're getting on those, or you should be getting on those codes, and then the rates that you're actually getting paid on those codes, and it multiplies it against the appropriate volume to determine whether or not the revenue is flowing at the level it should, and then it flags the conditions where revenue based on claims processing is below the contracted rate, and that's what you want to flag and make sure that you handle. We are getting to the end here, so what I'm going to do is open up the lines for a moment, because I think we've covered a lot of the points coming up here, and I'd rather finish with a couple of meaningful questions and then do a quick summary and give everybody a generous offer, which I think they can all take advantage of. So, Susan, do we have some other questions that have come in?
Yeah, one just came in. I have a small DME company that wants to contract with several local medical groups, and whose MDs would like to refer, but that the DME companies basically don't hold, I'm just reading this, hold risk. The DME needs to be contracted with the payers, that the group IPAs hold contracts. In other words, the IPAs are the ones making the referrals, but the medical device companies have to have contracts with the payers in order to get those referrals. In other words, even though the IPA is the one making the referral, the DME company actually needs to contract with the payer to get paid, and that's called, and that relationship is called shared risk. So, Steve, do you want to address that, or how do you want to handle it?
I'm not sure. Are you understand? If you understand the question, why don't you field that one?
Okay. Basically, for certain types of providers, such as medical device companies, if they want to access referrals from large medical groups, they would need to have two different relationships. They would have to have a relationship with the local medical group to get the referrals, but the way that the relationship with the medical group works with the insurance company is that they're the ones, the medical group makes the referrals, but the insurance company actually is the one that pays the bill. It's called shared risk. So you need to have two different relationships. One with the medical group, it's not even a contractual relationship. It's just you go out there, you do some marketing, you set up a luncheon for those case managers, and then the second part of this is that you'll have to have a relationship, a contractual relationship with the payer. Now, the challenge is it's kind of like what comes first, the chicken or the egg. The payer, the IPA won't make a referral to you, meaning the DME company, without you having relationships with the payers. And the problem with getting contracts with the payers is that if there's a lot of competition, the payer will say, our network is full. Why do I need to contract with you? So, my suggestion would be is if you can get that medical group to kind of be your advocate, write a letter or make a phone call to the contracting person at the payer saying, okay, I'm IPA X, and I would like you to contract with this DME company so we at IPA X can see these patients. I know that I'm trying to kind of go fast because we've only got 2 more minutes, but if you have the person who answered the question, if you want to go ahead and give me a call, I can kind of address this in further detail. But in a nutshell, when you're dealing with medical groups, you have to have two different relationships, a relationship to get the referrals out of the IPA and a contractual relationship to actually get paid by the insurance company.
Okay, excellent. I'll give the audience an final opportunity here to ask any final questions. Press *6 if you'd like to do so.
Okay. In the meantime, Steve, I probably have about 12 other questions that I was not able to get to. So for those people that we didn't get to their questions, we will be contacting you to schedule some time to discuss your specific needs in further detail, or Steve can give you the information where you can contact me directly, and we can set up a time as well.
Yeah, and towards that end, a couple of closing points here. First off, I want to reflect back that we talked about consider your go-to-market strategy, your methods of distribution. We've talked a lot about payers. We've also talked about PBMs, formularies, and GPOs, and it's not an either or pick one of the above. It's pick the right combination of the above, along with your own sales force, to maximize your revenue. And go ahead and, Susan says, give us a call. What we'll do on any questions, we'll make sure to respond to each and every one of them as well, and encourage everybody here to simply send an email to Susan, charkin@healthcents.com, or phone her up at that number, and she will go ahead and do a free half-hour consultation with you. And to the extent that you can bring some information about your sales channels and your go-to-market, anything that you can bring that will, make the conversation more meaningful for you, she will then be able to help, further dissect, as we talked about up front, what the appropriate go-to-market, payer strategy, formulary strategy, PBM, distributor network, et cetera, what's going to work best in concert to maximize your revenues. A copy of this session will be made available within the next 24 hours. You will get a notification by virtue of having enrolled for this session about the availability. I'll tell you right now, the PDF version is already at healthcents.com/copy, COPY. And, however, within 24 hours, we'll have the complete recording of this session available to you as well. So without further ado, I want to thank all of you for your participation today, and we trust that you've derived some value for your organization, and we also look forward to answering any of those unanswered questions. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you all for your participation.